Welcome to Omaha Beach. Not the kind of beach where you sip margaritas unless you like your drinks with a side of hot shrapnel. The landing craft rocks forward, packed with guys whose faces are pale as milk, either seasick or realizing this trip is one way only. Captain Miller tries to keep his cool. The ramp drops in down. Half the men don't even touch the sand. Bullets zip past like angry hornets on steroids. Grenades popping like popcorn, except this popcorn takes your head clean off. Miller dives into the freezing water, swimming through waves and blood, while hot metal rains from above, like the world's worst spa treatment. The air is filled with screams, not the fun kind from a concert, but the help, my legs gone, kind. He finally reaches cover behind a twisted metal barricade. Knowing this isn't war anymore, it's a 30-second challenge just to stay alive. By some miracle, or maybe just sheer dumb luck, Miller and the few who survived crawl up the beach, ducking behind metal fangs and sand dunes like scared crabs. The chaos hasn't stopped. Bullets keep singing past their heads. Mortar keep kicking up sand and body parts. And somewhere, a guy is still yelling for his mom. Orders are flying left and right, but honestly, it's less military precision, and more, everyone's just trying not to die. Pinned down behind a half-buried steel barricade, Miller takes stock of his so-called elite squad, a couple of riflemen who can barely reload without shaking, a medic who looks like he's rethinking every life choice, and a guy with a flamethrower who's grinning like he just found his calling in life. The enemy's got the high ground, the firepower, and apparently an endless supply of bullets, while Miller's got, well, sarcasm, grit, and a plan so crazy it just might work. At the seawall, Miller's leadership isn't about speeches or glory. It's about pointing at the next piece of hell and convincing his guys they can survive crossing it. His squad moves like a ragged machine, each part dented, but somehow still working. He just needed to knock out the last of those MG-42 gunners, and the mortar crew up north then. There'd be a nice little hole in their defenses, just big enough for him to squeeze through. Jackson, the sniper, picks off targets like he's at a carnival booth, while Rabin lays down fire with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for bad poker bets. They finally push forward, clearing out the bunkers one grenade at a time until the beach is, well, let's just say ours, if you ignore the fact that it looks like hell's front yard. And just like that, after hours that felt like days and bodies that could have filled a football field, the bunkers were smoking ruins, the MG-42 silent, and the mortar teams permanently retired. Miller's squad stood there. No cheering, no high fives, just the quiet understanding that winning here meant living long enough to get the next impossible job. And as HQ's orders came crackling through the radio, you could almost hear the collective thought, great, what could possibly go wrong next? Far from the beaches, in a quiet War Department office where the loudest sound is the clack of a typewriter. Then someone spots a grim pattern 3 Ryans, all brothers, all dead within days. The last one, missing somewhere in France. The mood shifts from routine bureaucracy to a moral emergency. A report is typed up, stamped, and hand-delivered to the desk of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Before the letter from Roosevelt could even warm the inside of a dispatch bag, a government car rolled up a dusty Iowa road toward the Ryan farmhouse. 2 officers in spotless uniforms stepped out. Mothers in wartime knew exactly what that kind of visit meant. The sort of truth that buckles knees and drains the air out of a room. While she was told that 3 of her boys were gone. A formal letter leaves the Oval Office, sealed with the weight of presidential authority. Find Private James Francis Ryan and bring him home. Not because it's tactically smart, but because in the middle of the biggest slaughterhouse on Earth, sometimes leaders decide to make a symbolic gesture. And symbols, everyone in that office knows, cost more than the ink used to justify them. Somewhere on the blood-soaked coast of Normandy, Captain John H. Miller had just finished turning chaos into something vaguely resembling a victory. His reward? Not rest, not a hot meal, just another impossible errand dressed up as orders. A colonel handed him the kind of mission that only looks simple on paper. March through a country crawling with enemy patrols to find one soldier, a private, and bring him home. It wasn't strategy. It was sentiment with a body count. Miller didn't need to ask how many men this would cost. The answer was always the same: as many as it takes. Because somewhere far from the mud and the stench, a man in a clean office had decided this gesture was worth other people's lives. And just like that, the war got smaller, meaner, and far more personal. The march through the countryside was quiet enough for introductions. Not that anyone really wanted to know the names of men they might be burying by week's end. First was Sergeant Horvath, Miller's right hand and the kind of man who could carry a house on his back if orders said so. Then Caparzo, young and reckless, carrying more attitude than ammunition. Wade, the medic, whose calm hands were good at keeping men alive, just long enough to die somewhere else. Ribin, the loudmouth with a machine gun, because God forbid death should come quietly. Jackson, the sniper who spoke to God more than to people. And Mellish, who cracked jokes like the war was a comedy that just needed better writers. And finally, Upham, the replacement green as the grass under his boots, staring at everything like he'd accidentally walked into the wrong nightmare. By the time they reached the outskirts of the ruined town, the sky had decided to join the war. Rain fell in sheets, soaking their uniforms until the cold felt personal. Through the curtain of rain, shapes began to move American helmets. Miller cut to the point. We're looking for a Private James Francis Ryan 101st Airborne. Airborne, huh? If he's lucky, he landed on solid ground. If not, well, maybe he's still hanging from a tree somewhere. Miller signaled the men forward, weaving through the skeletal remains of buildings that once meant something to someone. Rain hammered the broken rooftops, dripping through holes like the place was crying for itself. In the hollowed-out shell of what used to be a home, they found them. Father, mother, a girl, and a baby. Caparzo scooped up the little girl, his rifle slung uselessly at his side, a rare smile flickering across his face. And then one sharp crack, no warning. Caparzo staggered, the smile still there for a half second, before the weight of the world and the bullet dropped him into the mud. Somewhere up in the skeletal remains of a building, a sniper had just scored himself a little piece of someone's humanity. Caparzo lay on his back in the mud. He fumbled at his jacket, pulling out a crumpled, mud-stained envelope and shoved it weakly toward Miller. High above, through the shattered remains of a building, the German sniper still had him in the scope, patient as a vulture. Jackson exhaled slowly, his fingers steady. The rifle roared, and the sniper's head disappeared from the equation. The air smelled like cordite and wet plaster, and for a moment, you could almost pretend it was justice. Almost. Miller's eyes lingered on Caparzo's body, just long enough to make it hurt. Then he turned. We keep moving. In this war, grief wasn't a pit stop. It was just another thing you carried. The camp baked under the midday sun, canvas tents stretching in neat rows like someone thought war should be organized. The air tasted like dust and boredom. It had been days since Caparzo's death, but the team carried the silence like extra gear heavy and always in the way. Miller walked through the heat haze, calling out, "Private Ryan," like maybe the guy would just pop out from behind a crate. Then, from the chow line, a voice shot back, James Francis Ryan, C Company? And just like that, God decided to send an intern to help. The man Mendelsohn was no hero, just a sunburned grunt who'd shared foxholes with Ryan before getting split up. He pointed east toward Ramelle with the casual fatalism of someone who'd seen enough to know you don't. Rush toward places like that, you survive them, if you're lucky. The road to Ramelle was paved in bodies. In the distance, a lookout tower leaned over the tree line, like it was keeping score of who was still stupid enough to be walking this way. Miller's jaw tightened. The tower wasn't just scenery. It meant someone was watching, and not the friendly kind. Miller wasn't thrilled about the job, but if that tower stayed standing, it'd turn the next American convoy into a bullet buffet. So, like every grim task in this war, it became everyone's problem, whether they liked it or not. Miller broke down the plan like a bad joke nobody wanted to hear. The squad moved like shadows. Every step was a gamble. Upham, the translator, just stood there watching his buddies dance with death, bullets whipping past like angry hornets and grenades popping off like some twisted fireworks show. Then, out of nowhere, silence. Without missing a beat, Upham hustled forward, lugging his gear into the heart of the chaos. Wade took a step too far from cover. Well, that's war. The others barely had time to curse before Miller barked orders. No heroics, just cold efficiency. Wade's luck was spent, and the war wasn't finished with him yet. Suddenly, Ribbon snagged a live German soldier, an awkward little prize, amidst the mountain of corpses littering the tower. The squad's collective moral compass instantly went haywire, ready to turn this guy into their new punching bag, or worse. But then Miller, in a move that pissed off half the team, just let the guy walk. The camp practically blew up, old loyalties fractured, tempers erupted, and Reiben looked like he was about to lose his last shred of sanity. Miller's cold logic? He wasn't about to sign up for extra funerals or paperwork. Mercy, in his world, was just a convenient excuse not to carry another dead weight. In the grim calculus of war, compassion was a liability, and this decision? Everyone swallowed it bitterly, because survival often means choosing which souls you're willing to lose. They were slogging through a dry, green field when suddenly the armored vehicle rolled onto the dry field, rumbling like a stubborn beast. Before it got a taste of some angry fireworks, a bombing that turned the metal hulking mess into a smoking wreck. But then, out of nowhere, a shot rang out clean. Ryan and his small crew didn't look like much of a welcome. Committee more like a ragtag group that had been through hell and back, wondering if anyone was actually coming to save them, or just to add to the body count.
Ryan, first to 506.
Ipsy telling me third and 506.
James Francis, Ryan? Yes, sir.
They reached Ramelle, the last bridge before whatever hell awaited beyond. Miller took a breath, the weight of the mission heavy on his shoulders. He laid it out straight. They were there to bring Ryan home, and that meant telling him his 3 brothers were dead. The kind of news nobody wants, but someone's got to deliver. Ryan listened, eyes steady but cold, and then refused flat out. No speeches, no pleas, just a blunt no. Because in a war where everyone's fighting to survive, sometimes the hardest battle is the one you fight alone. The rejection hit the squad like a punch to the gut. 2 lives sacrificed just to find this guy, and for what? To be told no? The grumbles started low but quick, like an avalanche waiting to roll. Every man had an opinion, most of them involving a burial at sea or a long walk off a short pier. But Miller, a soldier through and through, just sighed and nodded. He got it. This wasn't about orders or medals. Ryan wasn't just refusing to leave. He was standing guard over that last damn ridge, holding on to whatever scraps of purpose the war hadn't eaten yet. And sometimes, the hardest orders are the ones you don't give. In the grand tradition of throwing good men into bad situations, Miller decided to stick around and join the ragtag bunch guarding the Ramelle Bridge. Because why not? When you've already lost 2 good men chasing a ghost, signing up for a suicide mission seemed like the logical next step. He set about carving up the battlefield with the kind of ruthless efficiency only war can teach, placing men where they do the most good, or at least delay the inevitable. The plan was simple. Welcome the full German army with open fire, and pray the hell didn't come early. Miller wasn't about to pretend this was a victory march. It was just another day closer to whatever waiting for them on the other side of that bridge. After they finished setting up and took a brief, absurd coffee break because nothing says last stand like sipping lukewarm Jave, the Germans rolled in. Leading the charge was their pride and joy, the Panther tank, a metallic nightmare built to tear defenses apart. But Miller, Ryan, and their ragtag crew were already lined up on that last damn bridge, ready to welcome them with open fire.
Half-track just went by.
Bullets shattered the morning calm, turning the field into a deadly orchestra. The Panthers thundered forward, hunting shadows like metal beasts, but the defenders fought like cornered dogs, ferocious, desperate, and with nothing left to lose. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers, and every shot was a silent scream. This fight wasn't ending without hell breaking loose. The Americans, finally done with polite greetings, unleashed hell. Bullets tore through the air like angry wasps, ripping into the advancing Germans with all the fury they'd been saving up. Machine guns spat death with mechanical precision, turning enemy lines into Swiss cheese one body at a time. The roar of explosions was the soundtrack of carnage, each blast another grim reminder that the war wasn't about glory, it was about survival, pure and ugly. But this wasn't some walk in the park. The Germans weren't just rolling in, they were roaring in. Their Panther tanks snarled like beasts unleashed, and Jackson, perched high with a sniper's pride, took a hit that sent him crashing down. Miller saw it all, the iconic moment the lookout tower exploded in a shower of splinters and fire, a grim reminder that luck was a fleeting visitor here. Upham, the translator, was born for everything but war. From the moment he first set foot on the battlefield, he couldn't even bring himself to lift a weapon, because apparently, bravery wasn't part of his job description. Meanwhile, Mellish fought tooth and nail just to keep breathing, while Upham, the translator, broke down crying like a kid who just realized war wasn't a game and let his buddy slip away. Sergeant Horvath wasn't spared either. Bullets found their way to him too, though he held the line with Miller's help. The German onslaught kept coming, brutal and unrelenting, herding the Americans into a corner where hope was just a fading ghost. Ryan and everyone else, including Captain Miller, kept fighting against those metal monsters, even as the shell casings slammed right into their faces, because quitting wasn't on the menu, no matter how brutal the welcome. Miller and his squad found themselves backed into a corner Ramelle Bridge, slipping through their fingers like sand. Explosions kept pounding them relentlessly, each blast a reminder that this hell had no mercy. Sergeant Horvath was hanging by a thread, barely holding on, his strength fading like the last light before darkness swallows everything. The fight was slipping away, but surrender wasn't an option anyone dared to whisper. Even Miller, the tough-as-nails soldier, wasn't immune. One sharp bullet finally found its mark. Just when it looked like the last bridge and every last man on it were about to become history, the sky finally answered with a roar and a cloud of death. The P-51 Mustang swooped in like a guardian angel armed with bombs, turning the German tanks and troops into a smoldering mess. It was the kind of rescue you don't see coming until you're already halfway to the grave. Miller didn't cheer he couldn't. Shot and gasping for breath, he was barely holding on. With his last ounce of strength, he made one thing clear. Ryan had to live. Ryan was the fragile thread holding their shattered mission together, the only hope that this nightmare could end, so Miller could finally rest. Ryan's pain exploded into a scream so raw and haunting it echoed in his bones for decades, carrying him through a long life filled with children and grandchildren living proof of a war's cruel bargain.